tensions in the South China Sea are once again reaching dangerous levels. And this time, Filipino fishermen are finding themselves directly in the middle of the crisis. What used to be a routine journey into traditional fishing waters has now become a risky mission filled with fear, uncertainty, and confrontation. Around Scarborough Shoal, fishermen say they are being blocked, chased, and intimidated while simply trying to earn a living. For many families in coastal communities across the Philippines, the sea is everything. It is their source of food, income, and survival. But now, those same waters are becoming one of the most dangerous flashpoints in Asia. Scarborough Shoal, known locally as Bahaje Masinloc, has long been an important fishing ground for Filipino fishermen. Located west of Luzon, the area has supported generations of fishing families who depend on its rich waters. But over the years, the shoal has become the center of a growing territorial dispute between the Philippines and China. Today, the tension surrounding the area is no longer just about politics or international law. It is affecting real people in very real ways. Filipino fishermen say every trip to the shoal now comes with serious risks. Some describe being surrounded by large Coast Guard vessels. Others report aggressive maneuvers, loud warning sirens, and dangerous encounters at sea. Small wooden fishing boats often find themselves face to face with massive steel-hulled ships. And for many fishermen, the fear is becoming overwhelming. Some crews say they no longer know if they will return home safely after heading toward the disputed waters. Others say they are forced to abandon fishing areas they have used for decades because the danger has become too great. The situation has worsened in recent months after reports emerge of new barriers and intensified patrols around Scarborough Shoal. Satellite images and maritime monitoring groups showed vessels positioned near the entrance of the lagoon, limiting access to the area. For Filipino fishermen, this has become more than just an inconvenience. It threatens their entire livelihood. Fishing communities in western Luzon say catches have dropped as access to traditional fishing grounds becomes more restricted. Many fishermen now spend more money on fuel because they are forced to travel farther away from productive waters. Some return home with almost nothing after days at sea. Others say they are constantly anxious while fishing, worried that another confrontation could happen at any moment. The emotional toll is growing just as fast as the financial pressure. One fisherman described the situation as heartbreaking, saying the waters that once fed entire villages are now filled with fear. Another explained that fishermen are no longer thinking only about weather conditions or equipment problems. Now, they must also think about the possibility of dangerous encounters with foreign vessels. The Philippine government has repeatedly condemned what it describes as aggressive actions in the West Philippine Sea. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has maintained a firm position on the issue, insisting that the Philippines will continue defending its sovereign rights and protecting Filipino fishermen. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. has strongly criticized actions that place civilian fishermen in danger. He warned that ordinary people trying to make a living should never become victims of geopolitical rivalry. The Philippines has also increased Coast Guard patrols in the area in an effort to support fishermen and monitor activity near the shoal. But despite these efforts, tensions remain high. China continues to insist that Scarborough Shoal belongs to Beijing and says its patrol operations are lawful. Chinese vessels have maintained a strong presence in the area for years, especially since the 2012 standoff that dramatically changed control over the shoal. Since then, Filipino fishermen say Condi, even after an international tribunal ruled in 2016 that China's sweeping claims in the South China Sea had no legal basis, confrontations at sea continued. For many fishermen, the legal victory brought hope at the time. But on the water, they say little changed. Chinese Coast Guard ships remained active around the shoal, and Filipino fishermen continued reporting intimidation and restricted access. Now, the latest developments are creating new fears that the situation could become even more dangerous. Security analysts warn that repeated confrontations in the area raise the risk of accidents or unintended escalation. A collision between vessels or a miscalculation at sea could quickly spark a larger regional crisis. That possibility worries not only the Philippines, but also neighboring countries and international allies watching developments closely. The South China Sea is one of the world's most important maritime trade routes. Billions of dollars in global trade pass through these waters every year. Because of this, tensions in the region have major international implications. But while governments discuss strategy and security, fishermen remain focused on something much simpler: survival. Many fishing families live day to day, depending entirely on what they can catch from the sea. When access becomes limited, entire communities feel the impact almost immediately. Local fishing leaders say some families are already struggling financially because catches have become smaller and trips more dangerous. Some younger fishermen are beginning to leave the industry altogether, fearing that the risks are no longer worth it. Older fishermen, meanwhile, speak with sadness and frustration. Many say they spent decades fishing peacefully around Scarborough Shoal before tensions transformed the area into a heavily monitored hotspot. Some fishermen now avoid the shoal completely, even though it means traveling farther into less producty the waters. Others travel in groups for protection, hoping safety comes in numbers. But even then, fear remains constant. Community leaders have called on the government to provide stronger protection and more support for affected fishing villages. There are also growing calls for the international community to pay closer attention to what is happening in the disputed waters. Human rights advocates argue that ordinary civilians should not suffer because of territorial disputes between powerful nations. Maritime experts also warn that fishermen are increasingly becoming frontline victims in what many describe as a gray zone conflict, a confrontation that falls somewhere between peace and open war. Instead of direct military clashes, countries use coast guards, maritime militias, barriers, and intimidation tactics to strengthen control without triggering full-scale conflict. And right now, Scarborough Shoal is becoming one of the clearest examples of that strategy. Military analysts believe China's long-term goal is to steadily tighten operational control over disputed waters while avoiding a direct military confrontation. This approach creates constant pressure on rival claimants while slowly changing realities on the ground, or in this case, on the water. For smaller fishing communities, that pressure can feel impossible to resist. Some fishermen say they feel abandoned and powerless whenever large vessels approach them at sea. They describe moments of panic as boats maneuver dangerously close or block their routes. Others say the psychological pressure alone is enough to discourage fishermen from returning to certain areas, and yet many continue going back, not because they want conflict, but because they have no choice. Fishing is the only livelihood many families know. Without access to productive waters, survival becomes even harder in already struggling coastal communities. The Philippines has strengthened defense cooperation with allies like the United States. It says in response to rising tensions in the South China Sea, joint military exercises and expanded security partnerships are now taking place more frequently. These moves are intended to improve maritime defense capabilities and deter further escalation. But they have also increased tensions with Beijing, which accuses the Philippines of inviting outside powers into the dispute. As military activity in the region grows, concerns about the future continue to rise. Some analysts fear Scarborough Shoal could eventually become the site of an even larger confrontation if tensions continue escalating. Others worry that constant pressure on fishermen could permanently change the economic future of coastal communities dependent on the sea. Despite everything, many Filipino fishermen remain determined to continue defending what they see as their traditional fishing grounds. They say these waters belong to their communities long before the current tensions began, and they believe future generati deserve the same right to fish safely in the area. Still, uncertainty dominates daily life. Every trip to sea now carries questions. Will they be allowed to fish peacefully? Will another confrontation happen? Will they make it home safely? For many families, those fears have become part of everyday life. As tensions continue around Scarborough Shoal, one reality is becoming increasingly clear. This dispute is no longer just about territory or politics. It is about ordinary people whose lives are being transformed by a conflict far bigger than themselves. It is about fathers leaving home before sunrise, not knowing what dangers await them at sea. It is about families waiting anxiously on shore for boats to return safely. It is about fishermen forced to choose between risking confrontation or losing the income their families depend on. And unless tensions ease soon, the crisis facing Filipino fishermen may only continue growing more dangerous in the months ahead.